Hi, I'm Sebastian Hammer with Index Data. We're a software company specializing in information retrieval, in providing different ways to build bridges between systems and connecting users with information. One of the ways we do this is to help our partners and customers build search portals, single points of access to different information resources, which can be customized or adapted to the needs of a group of users. These portals can be great tools. They allow users to be more productive or to discover resources that they might otherwise not think to access. One of the challenges in building such portals is how to access the information resources behind the interface. In some cases, the best way to do this is to ask the providers to give you a copy of their data so that you can index them yourself. But this is not always possible. In other cases, there may be APIs that you can program against, but again, this is not always the case. In many situations, the only thing you can do is to write code that accesses the interface of the resource like a normal user and extracts the necessary information. This can be both time-consuming and difficult. We've built a tool to make it easier. We call it our connector framework, and this is how it works. We start with a page like this one, the HathiTrust Digital Library, a great collection of freely available digitized books, which would make a good addition to a library-related discovery tool. Let's have a look at this interface and see what kinds of search options we have before we start building our connector. We see here that in addition to this simple keyword search, there's an advanced catalog search. We'll have a look at it. And in general, if you have the time and inclination when you're building a connector, it's a good thing to allow for as much flexibility as possible in the choices that users make when they do searches. That makes for a connector that can be used in more different types of circumstances. We see in this case that we have an option to search all fields, author, title, subject, and we have some additional options available by using these drop-downs. We also have a checkbox that allows us to restrict results to only those records corresponding to open access ebooks. And that seems like a useful thing for us to do in this particular context. So let's start building a connector and see how it goes. The first thing I'm going to do is to call up our connector authoring environment, or as we call it, the connector builder. And I do that with a keyboard shortcut like this. Now over here I have the search page as before, and to the left I now have the builder environment. And this essentially lets me instantiate the different tasks that make up a connector: searching, parsing the results that come back, navigating to the next page of results so that we can parse another page full of records. And down here I have the arguments that are, or the possible parameters that are made available to a search. Here I create the steps that make up each task, the specific operations that I have to do against this website to make it do what I want it to do. And down here I will be able to see the results of these steps when they are run. So let's begin to create our search task. And I start by adding a step to tell the software what page I want to start with. So I add an OpenUL step. And down here on the right-hand side, I now have my step configuration pane, and it will have options and functions depending on the step I'm trying to set up right now. In this case, what I need to do is to configure the OpenUL step with the UL of the current page, and I do that just by pushing this button here. And I can now see over here that I've created the first step of my task. And if I were to run that step, I would simply see the page reloading, which is not very interesting. The next thing I'm going to do is to start populating the search form with my input parameters. And to do that, I use the set form value step. And I'm going to start with the keyword search. And I go here and I simply identify the input form that corresponds to a keyword search. And having done that, I can test that I've done it right by putting in a test value up here. and then I can run this step, and I can verify that indeed the input field is populated correctly. So having done that, let's go ahead and add a couple more input fields using the same technique. I will add a set form value step, and I will map the author field to the correct input field. And we will do the same thing for title. Like so. And now, because it's often very useful in bibliographic systems to be able to limit a search by publication date, I'm going to use this last input field here to do a date search. But in order to do that, I need to first change the value of this drop-down list. And I can do that in the connector framework using, again, the set form value step. And here's how that works. I, again, do a select node. And then in addition to, I select this node, and in addition to selecting it, I also specify what field I want to use. And you'll see here that the input has automatically configured itself to populating this node with a constant value, and that is the value that corresponds to that piece of the dropdown. So I can now go ahead and add another set form value step to actually populate the input field with a date if one is available, like so. Now, if I were to try that again, you will see the system reloading the page and automatically setting this drop down to the correct value, as well as populating the field. So we'll just try to run the whole form again, and you notice that the drop down has been correctly set for a date search. The last thing I want to do is to enable a full view, a restriction to only full view records. And I can do that using the click step. And I will point to the checkbox, and I will turn off this option to say we don't expect the page to reload after we've clicked, so we don't have to wait for it. And now if I run the whole task again, I should see the page nicely load up, and I'm all set to do a search that's restricted to only records that are available in full text. The last thing I have to do is to launch the actual search, and I do that by adding another click step. And in this case, all we're doing is we're clicking on the submit button. And now, having done that, I should see the page load up and populate with my test parameters, and something should happen. And here we go. We have search results back from the server. We'll see that we have a hit count up here, and below that we have the individual records, and we have navigational buttons to get us to the next page of the result set. So now we have to finish our search task by interpreting or by grabbing the hit count so that we can return that as part of our search results. And we do that by adding another step, an extract value step. And as before, we select the value that we want to, or we select the node that we wish to extract something from. And we can test that by clicking on the play button. And we see down here in the results pane the hit counts correctly extracted. That is our search task, and we can now move on with the more interesting task of parsing the results that have come back. To continue on, we switch the current task from the search task that we've just completed to the parse task. And as before, we now continue by populating this task with the individual steps required to extract the results. We'll start by adding a parse by X pattern step. And the X pattern is a a language that we have invented which expresses the relationship between the individual nodes that make up a record. So in this case, we have a thumbnail image accompanied by a title as an author and the publication dates, and the relationship between these individual elements, to the extent that they are constant from record to record, can be used to determine not only the structure of records but also the association of individual elements of the record with field names. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. I click on Start Creating a Pattern, and then we just start to identify the elements of the record that we're interested in. And in this case, we associate that first field with the title. And we're going to make a note here that we would like to map the href attribute into a URL. And we will go ahead and add another note. To add in the author name. And a third note would be the publication date. And then we will see if we can get hold of the thumbnail URLs as well. And in this case, since it's an image, what we want is actually only the attribute, in this case the source attribute, that we will map into the field thumb URL. Next thing, we will try to generate a pattern from what we have put together here. And the pattern here shows us a representation again of the structure of one record as displayed by this search system. And if we try now to execute this pattern, we should see hopefully a representation of, we will see the records highlighted down the page, assuming that we did everything right. And in this case, we see there's one record here that didn't get matched because the pattern didn't exactly match the contents of that. And we could use an HTML debugging tool to try to determine exactly what goes wrong. But in this case, it seems that what's happening here is that this record is missing a thumbnail. So we will try to simply mark that node manually as being optional. We do that by just appending a question mark. And we can go ahead now and try to run the pattern again. And here we go. We've got now all the records matched. And we can go down at the bottom here to the results pane again, and we can look at the results that come back now in a structured form. And there's a couple of issues that we're noticing. One is that the URL is a relative URL, which is fine within the website, but we would really like that to be an absolute URL with the host name and everything part of it. So to do that, we will add another step to clean that up. We add a normalize URL step, and most of the time there's no need for additional configuration of that step. It just works, and we can test it by running it. And here we go. Now we have nice complete URLs. We also would like to remove the published prefix from the date field, and we can do that again by adding a transform result step. And we can input here fairly complex regular expressions to match different kinds of strings, prefixes and suffixes and so on. However, we also have a series of handy patterns that we can use for various purposes. In this case, we can use the last number pattern, and we will match that against the date field of the results lists, and we'll see how that works. Here we go. we now have all of the data elements that we find on this page nicely recognized. And we might test that by moving to the next result page. And here we can go ahead and run the whole sequence once again. And we'll just verify quickly by moving down the page that all records were recognized and we got good data back. That completes the pass step and the pass task. And the only thing we have left to do is to add a task that allows the connector framework to navigate on to the next page of results. And when records have been found, a typical application of a connector like this will be to alternate executions of the pass and next tasks in order to page through results and to pull back data. In most situations, a next task consists of only a single step, a click step. We'll add that and we will point at the next link. And because the structure of this list has a tendency to change when we move from one page to another, it's usually a good idea in this particular case to go in and refine the pattern that's automatically generated by, say, looking at the last element in the list here and say we would like to specifically match or find the link that has the text next. We'll save that and we can test that by running it. And we should be getting on to the third page, and if we do it one more time we should be getting on to the fourth page. And at this point really the only thing that I have left to do is to open up the connector metadata input field and put in a little bit of metadata. And I'm ready to move on to uploading the connector into a production repository so that I can use it in discovery solutions or other applications. But that is one complete and relatively functional connector that we've created. Thank you.